One of the reasons that I wanted to talk to Churchill, I'm happy to talk here tonight, of course, known as the polar bear capital of the world, and that's largely grown out of a lot of the tourism. But it's also kind of the polar bear capital of the world when it comes to research, and a lot of the discoveries that have been made here that apply to polar bears throughout the circumpolar Arctic. But one of the things that always intrigues me in science is where do ideas and things start? Well, for me, before I came back to Canada, I was 5 years in Antarctica and working with Weddell seals here. And one of the things that really struck me is there were a lot of people in the southern hemisphere at that time who were doing a lot of long-term studies on various things, element fields, a number of things. And I was very much influenced by the kind of things that they were finding out, by the fact that they stayed with something for more than 2 or 3 or 4 years. And when you work on something like Weddell seals, and I found even though I was only there for four seasons, there was a huge amount of variation between. So am I blocking your view from down there? Can you see? There was a huge amount of variation between years in what happened with reproduction and survival of seal pups, depending on what the ice conditions were like. And that really registered on me. So when I came back to Canada and started working on polar bears, one of the things I always had in the back of my mind was that I wanted to see eventually if we could find some situation where we could really maintain some long-term work. But in the meantime, we had to get going. And this is a large male polar bear. They get up around 500, 600, 700 kilos, and they can get a little bit larger on occasion. They're quite big. The males live up to about 25 years. Females live up to 25 or 30, or sometimes even into their early 30s, which is unusual, but not it has happened. They breed for the first time in most parts of the Arctic at about 4 or 5 years of age, and in the Beaufort Sea a year later than that. And they'll have 2 cubs about 2/3 of the time, 1 cub maybe 25% of the time, and occasional triplets. The cubs will stay with their mothers for 2.5 years before they're weaned and go off on their own. So the most often that the females will breed is have cubs is about every 3 years. And the females are about half the size of the males. No range anywhere from about 250 up to about maybe 350 or 400 kilos if they're fat and pregnant. Polar bears are a reasonably recent arrival on the evolutionary scene. And until relatively recently, we've been thinking that they were maybe only 250 to 300,000 years old. But most recently, there's just been a paper out when looking at molecular genetics, and it turns out the polar bears are actually about 1.3 million years old, and they evolved from grizzly bears, and they're still closely enough related that they can interbreed in zoos. And this is a picture of the only known hybrid of a polar bear and a grizzly bear in the wild. It was shot by an American hunter being guided for a polar bear hunt. A white bear walked out from behind a pressure ridge, and then when they got up to it, it had long claws like grizzlies, big black things out of here, and a hump on its shoulder. This is what it looked like when it was fully mounted. I don't think there's much of great interest in science, but everybody always asks me about it, so I put it in. The polar bears don't just wander around throughout the circumpolar Arctic. They're distributed in a number of different populations where they've learned to make a living, and the mothers pass the way to make a living on to their young. And there are about 19 of these populations sort of spread around the Arctic. You can see that there's 13 that are shared, either totally contained by Canada or shared with Greenland or Alaska. There's not much here in the polar basin. And the reason for that is that the prime polar bear habitat is over relatively shallow water. The continental shelf runs around here, and in relatively shallow areas, they're much more biologically productive. So remember that, because we'll come back to it. And of course, you'll see how shallow Hudson Bay and Fox Basin some of these areas are, and they're very biologically productive. Now, the Latin name of the polar bear is Ursus maritimus, which are the maritime bear, or the sea bear, and they're very well adapted for that kind of a life. They're very good swimmers. They've got great big front feet, which are very, very useful for swimming, but I think they also are extremely useful for walking, just like snowshoes on ice when it's ready to crack And you can see them out there, and sometimes they'll get right, and some of you may have seen them at the moment since the ice is just freezing up. They'll get right down on their hands and knees and go across shallow areas. Come out of the water, a couple of good shakes, a bit of a roll in the snow, they're dry and they're ready to go. Now, this one comes, you guys are all polar bear experts by now, so I don't need to tell you that they're curious, but that's kind of the job of a predator, because he never knows where his next meal is going to come from, or whether some new situation may be turning up that he's going to have to learn about quickly like that if he's going to survive. But one of the things that really characterizes polar bears is that they're always looking for things. And here's one that's checking out, looking out here at Churchill, looking for muskrats.